In episode 91, titled Staging and Exfiltration Concepts, the focus is on moving data safely in a way that minimizes risk, disruption, and unnecessary exposure. In professional testing, the goal is not to prove you can copy everything, but to prove what access enables and what protections succeed or fail under realistic constraints. Staging and exfiltration concepts show up because data movement is where many incidents become severe, and it is also where a careless test can create avoidable harm. The difference between responsible proof and reckless behavior often comes down to the discipline you apply when handling data. This episode frames staging and exfiltration as controlled, evidence-driven activities that respect scope, confidentiality, and operational stability.
Staging is best understood as preparing data for transfer, which includes collecting, organizing, and packaging proof artifacts so they can be handled predictably. Instead of grabbing files ad hoc, staging creates structure. You identify what evidence is needed, where it resides, and how to assemble it so you can demonstrate impact without chaos. Staging can involve selecting representative samples, capturing metadata, and organizing outputs so the narrative is clear for reporting. It also reduces the risk of mistakes because when evidence is staged intentionally, you are less likely to copy the wrong thing, miss the key detail, or spread sensitive material accidentally. The discipline of staging forces you to answer a critical question. What is the smallest set of artifacts that proves the claim? When you treat staging as preparation rather than accumulation, you keep your footprint small and your conclusions strong.
Exfiltration is the act of moving data out through chosen channels and constraints, and it should be treated as a high-risk concept, even when discussed at a high level. The reason is that moving data out of an environment is inherently sensitive because it can violate policy, trigger alerts, and create real confidentiality exposure if mishandled. In an assessment context, exfiltration is typically about demonstrating feasibility rather than executing large-scale transfer, and feasibility can often be proven with minimal data movement. Constraints shape the decision, including scope rules, time windows, network controls, and monitoring coverage that may make certain channels impractical or unsafe. When you think about exfiltration, you should think in terms of what could an attacker do and what can we responsibly demonstrate, because those are not always the same thing. A mature approach proves the risk while avoiding the act of creating a new incident. Compression and encryption matter because they reduce size and protect confidentiality, and these are two separate but connected reasons. Compression reduces the volume of data, which can shorten transfer time and reduce the operational footprint, especially in environments with limited bandwidth or strict time constraints. Encryption protects confidentiality if data must be handled outside the original system boundary, ensuring that even if a package is intercepted or misrouted, the contents are not trivially exposed. In practical security terms, encryption is also a governance signal because it shows that the handler is treating the artifacts as sensitive. Compression can also affect detectability because smaller transfers can blend into normal traffic more easily, while large transfers may stand out. The key concept is that packaging choices change both safety and visibility, so they are part of the risk calculus, not an afterthought.
Channels are the routes through which data could move, and at a conceptual level, you can group them by how they resemble normal activity and how controllable they are. Web traffic is a common channel category because most environments allow outbound web access in some form, and it can carry data in ways that resemble ordinary browsing or application communication. DNS, like signals, represent low-bandwidth signaling patterns that can move small amounts of information in constrained ways, often relying on what is allowed out of the network and what is monitored closely. Removable media introduces a different risk profile because it bypasses some network controls but creates physical handling risks, chain of custody challenges, and opportunities for accidental spread. The important idea is that channels are constrained by policy, monitoring, and environment design, and the best channel depends on what you are authorized to test and what is safe. In responsible work, you do not chase clever channels. You choose the channel that demonstrates the point with minimal risk.
Monitoring influences choices because noisy paths trigger alerts quickly, and noisy behavior can disrupt operations and compromise the integrity of the assessment. If the environment has strong egress monitoring, large outbound transfers, unusual destinations, or suspicious protocol patterns may light up immediately. That can be valuable to know because it shows detection strength, but it can also create friction if it triggers escalations that disrupt business or consume incident response resources unnecessarily.
A disciplined approach considers what defenders are likely to see and how your activity might be interpreted, especially if communication plans and coordination are part of the engagement constraints.
Monitoring also shapes feasibility, because a channel that is heavily controlled may be unrealistic for an attacker, or it may be realistic but quickly detected, which changes the risk story.
Your goal is to demonstrate exposure and control behavior without turning the engagement into a simulated crisis. Safe boundaries are essential because the easiest way to fail professionally in this area is to collect too much or to collect the wrong thing.
The rule of minimum necessary data should guide staging decisions, evidence packaging, and any discussion of transfer feasibility. If the objective can be proven with metadata, a single redacted sample, or a narrow extract, then copying large sensitive datasets is unnecessary and dangerous. Safe boundaries also include respecting scope, which may prohibit touching certain data categories altogether, and respecting confidentiality controls that protect regulated or personal information. Even within scope, you should treat discovered data as sensitive by default, because classification is not always obvious at first glance. When you keep boundaries tight, you protect the organization and you protect the integrity of your findings.
Now, consider a scenario where you must choose a channel under tight monitoring and limited time, and the objective is to demonstrate impact without disruption. You have confirmed access to a sensitive repository, but you know that outbound traffic is closely watched and large transfers will trigger immediate alarms. You also have a narrow window to produce evidence before the engagement phase ends or before a change window closes. In this situation, the most responsible choice is to avoid any large data movement and instead stage a minimal proof artifact that confirms access and sensitivity without copying the dataset. That might involve capturing a controlled sample, a file listing with minimal identifying detail, or a record count combined with a clear description of what the repository contains. The scenario highlights that channel choice can sometimes mean choosing not to transfer at all, because the safest proof is often proof of access rather than proof of extraction. Evidence considerations in staging and exfiltration are about proving access and impact without creating a new confidentiality event. You want evidence that a reviewer can trust, such as timestamps, access context, and a clear demonstration that protected material was reachable. At the same time, you want to avoid copying large, sensitive datasets because volume increases risk and often exceeds what is required for remediation. The strongest evidence is often structured and minimal, such as a small representative sample that is redacted, accompanied by metadata that confirms origin, context, and scope. Evidence should also support the narrative that controls were bypassed or that exposure existed, not just that data exists somewhere. When you handle evidence thoughtfully, you deliver an actionable finding while preserving trust and minimizing harm. Pitfalls in this area are often simple and avoidable, such as exfiltrating more than needed or using unsafe storage locations that create accidental leakage. Overcollection is a common mistake because testers want to be thorough, but thoroughness is not measured by volume. It is measured by clarity and sufficiency of proof. Unsafe storage locations can include poorly controlled shared folders, unmanaged devices, or retention practices that keep sensitive artifacts longer than necessary, all of which can turn a test artifact into a lasting liability. Another pitfall is failing to account for operational impact, such as staging data on production systems in a way that consumes disk space, alters performance, or affects backup workflows. Even if the transfer never happens, staging itself can be disruptive if done carelessly. A professional posture treats data handling as a first-class risk, not as a minor implementation detail. Quick wins focus on demonstrating impact with small samples and strong documentation because that is the safest way to prove the story. A small, representative sample can show the category of data exposed without recreating a full dataset outside the environment. Strong documentation connects that sample to the access path, showing how the tester reached the data, what controls failed, and what boundaries were crossed. This approach also makes remediation easier because defenders can reproduce the access path and validate fixes without needing to handle large, sensitive artifacts. Quick wins also include choosing proof methods that reduce the need for transfer at all, such as demonstrating read access in place and recording minimal evidence. When you can prove impact with small, controlled evidence, you reduce both technical and compliance risk while still delivering a compelling finding. Reporting language for staging and exfiltration should be careful, precise, and focused on method, limits, and prevention controls rather than on sensational claims. You want to describe what was staged, why it was staged, and how it supported proof of access, while making it clear that data handling was minimized and controlled. If transfer feasibility is part of the finding, the report should describe the constraints observed, such as monitoring sensitivity and time windows, and how those constraints influence attacker capability and defender detection. Recommended prevention controls should emphasize limiting unnecessary data exposure, strengthening egress monitoring, enforcing least privilege, and improving logging and alerting around unusual access and data movement patterns. The language should avoid including sensitive content, and it should avoid implying that large-scale extraction was performed when it was not. A good report communicates risk clearly, without creating a new risk through disclosure.
A memory anchor helps keep your actions disciplined. Stage, protect, choose channel, minimize, record. Stage reminds you to organize proof deliberately rather than collecting randomly. Protect emphasizes confidentiality through careful handling and appropriate safeguards when artifacts must exist outside their original location. Choose channel reminds you that any movement concept must respect constraints, monitoring, and authorization, and sometimes the best channel is no transfer at all. Minimize keeps your footprint small by collecting only what is necessary to prove the finding. Record ensures you leave a clear, defensible trail of what was done, what was observed, and why those observations support the conclusion.
As we conclude episode 91, the core concept is that staging and exfiltration are about controlled evidence handling, not about volume or theatrics. You want to demonstrate impact safely by proving access, sensitivity, and feasibility under the environment's constraints while avoiding unnecessary disruption and data exposure. One minimal proof approach you can plan aloud is to identify a single representative artifact or metadata view that confirms sensitive access. Capture a tightly bounded and possibly redacted sample with clear context, and document the access path and controls observed without moving large datasets or using risky channels. That approach is defensible because it proves the risk while keeping the organization safe. When you apply this mindset, you deliver findings that are actionable and credible without creating the very incident you are meant to prevent. This is the professional standard for handling data movement concepts in serious engagements and the level of judgment Pen Test Plus is meant to assess.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.